Good morning, everybody. This is David. I've got just a couple minutes after 11, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for being here this morning for our October 2021 installment in our Understanding Our Wildlife Commission Science Informing Conservation series. Just a couple of housekeeping items as usual, just so everybody knows it is being recorded. The presentation will be made available later on both our YouTube channel and on our Wildlife Commission website. If you would, during the presentation, please mute your camera and your mic. And if you have questions or comments, put those in the chat. We'll save those till the end, and Ashley will answer any questions or address any comments then. So with that, our presenter today is Ashley Peckrell. She is our regulatory analyst in our Office of Conservation and Policy Analysis. Her presentation is on public policy in conservation and wildlife management, and she changed up the subtitle a little bit. I think maybe I like hers a little better because animals don't listen. And with that, Ashley, thanks for being here, and I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in today to hear more about our role as an agency in public policy. And like David said, unfortunately, animals do not listen to what we tell them to do, nor do they know what is best for them. So we need to regulate the people that interact with them instead. And that's what I'll be talking about today. So we here at the Wildlife Resources Commission are a regulatory agency responsible for the enforcement of North Carolina's fishing, hunting, trapping, and boating policies. Basically, everything that the public interacts with when it comes to North Carolina wildlife, we have a hand in, which is pretty awesome if you think about it. What we do has an effect on everyone in North Carolina and the wildlife in some way, shape, or form. So we do these things through laws, rules, and policies. Laws, otherwise known as statutes, are enacted by the General Assembly. These are the laws that tell us what we're allowed to make our rules on. So then rules are created by us here at the Commission, and this is what you'll likely hear from me about on a day-to-day basis while you're working. These are what regulate our general public and the wildlife. And then, of course, policies are created by the agency for itself. So these include things like our internal policies for deciding who we award collection licenses to, or how we would handle a certain disease outbreak. So I work in the Conservation Policy and Analysis Office, and our office includes social scientists, regulatory and policy analysts, a program strategist, and a diversity and inclusion coordinator. So you can say that we make up the quote unquote like people part of public policy, and we work collaboratively with other divisions and other offices to make sure that the general public is thought about in our programs and our policies. It's our goal as an office to create policies with biological and social data to improve the chances of successful outcomes with whatever changes we are proposing. And then that lovely red book on the left-hand side houses all of the statutes and rules that our agency has. If you haven't seen one of those already, they're pretty thick, but it's pretty much kind of like our agency Bible. So what exactly is public policy? You hear the term get thrown out a lot, both at the federal, state, and local level. Technically speaking, public policy is a course of action adopted or proposed by government, business, or individual. But practically speaking, public policy is a guideline for businesses, individuals, or government entities to follow. Policy outlines basically what may or may not be done. And it can be thought of as an idea that starts and turns into a law, which then becomes a rule or a regulation. And then, of course, it affects the public. So that leads us into our next point of what are regulations? So technically, a regulation is a rule issued by an administrative agency, typically the federal government, that regulates wildlife resources. You can think of this as the Code of Federal Regulations, which a lot of you might already be familiar with, and the paper copy of that looks like the picture on the left. Practically, we use this term interchangeably with rules, laws, and policies. You'll kind of just hear the term regulation thrown out there, and it can mean any plethora of rules, laws, or policies. An example of this is kind of our regulations digest that we hand out to everybody. It's kind of like a catch-all for all of those things. It houses our rules, and it also houses things like local laws. So this is a fun little video that I wanted to show you all. So before we get into the importance of public policy and how we implement it as an agency, I want to play this video of a song called I'm Just a Bill. Some of you may have seen it before. It's from Schoolhouse Rock, and my professor actually played this video on the first day of graduate school. It goes over the process of how an idea becomes a bill and then eventually gets turned into a law. And while this is not the main focus of what we do as an agency or what I'm going to dive into after this, I think it's important to recognize that it's part of the entire process of public policy as a whole. So start your morning off with a little bit of song.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. How I hope and pray that they will. But today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Woohoo! Hopefully you all have that stuck in your head for the rest of the day now. And just as an aside, the same thing happens here at the state level. So instead of the president that makes the final decision, it is the governor. So if the governor vetoes it, then it goes back to our legislature here in North Carolina. So if we do not create the laws, then what do? We make the rules. So the General Assembly grants the commission rulemaking authority. Essentially, the legislature creates these laws and then says, from these laws, you can further explain how you want them implemented to your public. We can then create stricter regulations on the law, but it's very rare that we'll ever be able to create more relaxed restrictions. And then the commission is allowed to adopt rules based on the subject matter within our jurisdiction. So for example, we can create rules on bag limits and season dates for deer. However, we can't really regulate and create rules on bag limits for cows and chickens, as those animals fall within the Department of Agriculture's jurisdiction and not our own. And then the commission has authority to adopt 3 types of administrative rules: permanent, temporary, and emergency. Permanent rules are what we do most often, and their intent is that once it's changed, you're not really going to change it again unless something were to come up. Temporary rules come up every now and then and must be done to create a change that may only be necessary for a short period of time, like a change in a bag limit for, say, one or 2 seasons only. And then emergency rules do not come up very often, but they're done when there's an immediate need to change a rule as it currently stands ASAP. And then all of our rulemaking must be done in accordance with the Administrative Procedures Act, or APA. It's basically a body of language that regulates what we can say, how we can say it, and how it should be formatted. There is a process for all of this. So what it starts out with is staff comes up with an idea for either an amendment to a rule, which would be a change, or we can come up with an entirely new rule. Sometimes the public are the ones that come up with the idea as well. It doesn't necessarily always need to be from our staff. Then the rule change is presented to our staff for review and formal creation in accordance with the APA, which is what I just mentioned in the last slide. A regulatory impact analysis or fiscal note is created listing all possible quantitative and qualitative impacts to the state, the public, and to local governments. Then you have the rule text and physical note are presented to our commission for review. And then the commission votes to hold a public hearing and notice of text in the North Carolina Register and online. Then this little highlighted part here is what we want to focus on today. A 60-day public comment period is held, and within that, a public hearing takes place. So this is where in our whole entire process that the general public has the formal ability to comment and give their opinion on our proposed changes. And this is where they get to be felt and heard. So this is really the big piece where the public comes into play of everything that we do here at the agency in terms of rulemaking. And then, of course, the commission reviews the final text and any public comments made before voting on its final adoption. And if they decide, yeah, this looks great, I want to move forward with this, it goes to the Rules Review Commission for final approval, which is essentially a giant board, a bigger version of our board that approves all of the different rules from all of the different state agencies. And then if approved, it goes into the North Carolina Administrative Code, which you can find online, and also every couple of years, that's what comes out in that red book that I showed you in the beginning. So, like most things, there's a good way and a bad way to make policy. A good policy will take into consideration all the possible stakeholders involved and involves them in the process of coming to a solution. Good policy takes all of the different outcomes we can consider into consideration, and the policy chosen benefits, quote unquote, the greater good or the most people. This is typically very time consuming and is going to involve a lot of different layers of multiple groups of people. Mediocre policy takes into consideration most of the stakeholders involved when coming to a decision. It considers a few possible outcomes and likely chooses the path of least resistance. So if we don't have a whole lot of time to create something, this is sometimes where policy falls. And then bad policy, which we never really want to do, does not take into consideration everyone that is going to be affected by the policy, and instead may only take the top stakeholders into consideration. Bad policy is typically done very quickly without much thought to all the possible outcomes at the end and takes the easiest route. And then lastly, how you involve people matters. So it's not okay to just say, let's just involve the public. We gave them time to comment and it's fine. We'll be good from there. So how you involve people really matters. As you can see from the timeline showed before, it's standard to involve the public at the back end of rule development when the rule has already been proposed, shown to the commission, and starts moving through the process. Possible pitfalls of this, however, is that the regulated public does not feel as heard or as valued because they weren't consulted with prior to proposed changes that affect them. You could also be missing out on vital information that only the public who is interacting with the wildlife know. They're the ones, a lot of the times they're on the landscape interacting with it every single day. So if we don't include them, they might know something that we don't. And then lastly, depending on the severity of the rule or the rule change, neglecting to involve the public and effects at the front end can lead to possible backlash and non-compliance, which is the last thing that we would want, and especially the last thing that our law enforcement would want. So how do we solve this? Trying to involve the public at the front end and engage them at the front as much as we can. Engaging them in conversations where they hear where our idea came from before it's ever even put pen to paper. Fun examples. So we're going to go through 3 different examples here, taking a population of Nestrians, saying that they're becoming very overwhelming to the state. They're a nuisance that destroys crops, spreads disease, and disrupts the predator-prey cycle. So what do we do? The quick and easy scenario would be to create a policy that might not be the best, but generally would involve 1 or 2 stakeholder groups. In this case, it would be if we only talked to our biologists who work with Nestrians on a day-to-day basis, but then didn't include anyone else in the conversation. Outcomes considered might be the predator-prey cycle, and then of course public health. Like I said, this is quick and easy, so it may only take 0 to 2 months to get the rule started through the process. Using the same example, the path of least resistance route, we would take maybe biologists and hunters now to gather their thoughts. So we're involving a little bit more stakeholders and considering a little bit more outcomes, taking just a little bit more time. So outcomes in this case might be now we consider hunter opportunity. Since we started engaging the hunter stakeholders, now we're going to start considering them and the outcomes instead of just public health and the predator-prey cycle. This usually takes a little bit longer, naturally, as you're talking to more people, and can take 3 to 6 months. Last one, the good standard gold policy would involve engaging with every single possible stakeholder group that we can think of. So here it could be biologists, other agency staff, law enforcement, hunters, homeowners, farmers, especially since Nestrians are destroying crops. That's kind of how farmers would come into play here. Other outcomes considered would be the crop harvested, again, hunter opportunity, might get into landowner rights, predator-prey cycles, and again, public health. So multiple outcomes are considered too, as additional stakeholders are involved, and they care about different things. And again, because you're talking to so many more people, this process takes quite a bit longer than the others. Now, at the end of the day, involving people doesn't mean that they get what they want or that they get everything that they have requested. It does not mean that they are happy with the outcomes, and it also does not mean that the agency must come to a compromise to appease our stakeholders. We are responsible for the wildlife resources of the state, and sometimes even with stakeholder input, like that is what needs to take priority, and the public might not always agree or understand that, and it's okay if they don't. However, involving people does allow us to collaborate to find the best possible solution as opposed to us acting in a funnel and then making decisions on our own. Arguably, one of the most important reasons to involve the public is that it allows people to feel heard. And as I'm sure many of you can relate, a lot of the time our public just wants to know that there's someone out there listening to their concerns and taking them into consideration when making decisions that affect them. By talking to people, we can also identify and explore issues and address them up front instead of creating some policy that might have unintended consequences down the line because we didn't decide to talk to anyone first. The public may also bring to light other issues during these conversations that we weren't even aware of. Overall, we get a better perspective on the possible outcomes of our policies when we're able to involve more people in these conversations. So what's the point of all this? Circling back, we cannot tell wildlife what to do. They will not listen to us. We cannot tell a deer to stay out of a specific field, and we can't expect a fish to know the difference between one body of water and the next. And that's why we must regulate people and their interactions with the wildlife. Generally speaking, people do not like to be told what to do, but that's our job, and we do that through rules. We don't always have the time or resources to involve people on the front end of a change, even though that's what produces the best outcomes. Any little thing we can do up front so individuals affected aren't surprised are going to help everyone involved. If we have time for a lengthy stakeholder process before we write a rule, that's awesome. And if we only have time for some quick discussions with representatives of a particular group that will be affected, or able to conduct a quick survey to determine how people feel about an issue, okay. But if we make changes in a vacuum and don't really talk to anyone else except our own agency, and the public doesn't get a chance to comment on these changes until the public comment period, they feel like the decision has already been made, and no matter what they say, it's not going to make a difference anyway. So the more work we can do with the public up front, the better chances of successful outcomes that we'll see down the line. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, great. Thanks. Thanks, Ashley. Anybody with any questions, like I said in the beginning, if you will, just put them in the chat. I guess I'll start off. giving folks a little bit of time here, and ask your opinion of how in the processes you described at our level and for our agency should the politics be incorporated.
So as far as, I guess when you say politics, are you talking about how like different stakeholders might come from different points of view and how that interacts with our job on staff?
No, to me, that's more social. That's more sociology than it is politics. I'm talking about the legislature. I'm talking about local governments. I'm talking about the governor's office. I'm talking about our commissioners. All of the politicians that have a role ultimately in what our agency is able to do.
Yeah, so there's kind of multiple parts to this. So we do have a liaison, and that's kind of their responsibility. Ashton is to kind of be the go-between between us and those legislators that are making those decisions. We do have an agency bill that gets put together every single year. Ours actually just got adopted and through the process, the governor signed off on it. My office particularly isn't too involved in that process, but they do take all of the considerations of what the commission really wants to hear, what our public wants to hear, and they kind of draft laws and regulations that might be wanted at that specific state legislature level. Does that answer your question?
Okay, great. Any other questions for Ashley? I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes here and then I'll do the last call. All right, Ashley, I'm not seeing any more pop up in the chat box. If anybody has any, certainly you can feel free to email. Oh, wait a minute. I twisted somebody's arm. How do you recommend staff members engage in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are always taking into consideration things that the public suggests too as well. So if you especially are on, like, say a biologist is out in the field and you see something that you think can be improved upon, whether that be like in rule or just in general that you think our agency might need to address a little bit more, that's always something that you can email myself or your division chief that can then forward it back to me. But really anything when you're on the landscape and you're like, this doesn't seem right, or I think we can do this better, or this seems like something that a regulated public should know, or something that needs to be changed that they're doing, as long as they just report it up to your supervisor, and then word will usually get around to me or someone in my office, like Carrie, who's my boss. So, and then of course during the through the process as the rule is being created, we try to disseminate that information to everyone that would affect as well. So if there's any questions or anything that ever comes up as we're working towards a rule that you catch wind of and you want to make a comment on it or have a suggestion, by all means, we're always open to that. The more input that we can get even from our own staff, the better off the rule is going to be at the end of the day.